Recording in progress.
1294, Mongol Empire splits. The Mongol Empire splits into the Khanate of the Great Khan, Golden Horse, Chagatai, and Ilkhanate. These would be the precursors to the major powers in Asia. 14th century, 1450, Lieutenant perfects his press. 1453, Constantinople falls to the Ottomans. 1492, Christopher Columbus lands in America. 1450, Lieutenant perfects his press. It first began by printing short texts, a German poem, church indulgences, Latin grammar guides. The Gutenberg Bible, printed in 1455. 1453, Constantinople falls to the Ottomans. Mehmed II strengthens Ottoman naval forces, outnumbers the Byzantines, and the Turkish Empire grows in power. Byzantine Christians go to the west, contributing to the humanist Renaissance. 1492, Christopher Columbus lands in America. He arrived in the Bahamas on October 1112, visiting Hispaniola and Cuba, and coming back with natives in Jan of 1493. This marks the beginning of the Columbian Exchange. 15th century, 1511-14, Spaniards conquer Cuba and prepare for empire. 1517, Martin Luther stamps his 95 Theses in Wittenberg. 1526, Mughal Empire begins. 1549, Francis Xavier lands in Japan. 1511-14, Spaniards conquer Cuba and prepare for empire. They establish their base there, moving to claim their vast territory. 1517, they explore Mexico. In 1519, the massacre of Cholula happens. In 1521, they destroy and visit Tenochtitlan. 1517, Martin Luther stamps his 95 Theses in Wittenberg. He criticizes the Catholic Church about indulgences, lapses in clerical celibacy, and the insistence of the intermediary figure of priest. This marks the start of Protestant Reformation and the breakdown of the Roman Catholic dominion. 1526, Mughal Empire begins. Babur, descendant of Timur, invades India using Diversanji tactics and establishes the Mughal Empire. 1526, Portugal sends in their first African slaves across the Atlantic. Africans are sent to Brazil and are enslaved. African slaves were originally taken in 1444, but were only utilized in 1526 in Brazil. Later on, this trade would spread to America in 1619, where 30 enslaved Africans landed in Virginia. 1549, Francis Xavier lands in Japan. Arriving in Kagoshima, he would preach the word of Christianity. He would face resistance from Buddhist and government officials. 16th century, 1602, Dutch East India Company and the Amsterdam Stock Exchange are formed. 1603, Tokugawa Ieyasu becomes ruler of Japan. 1607, the colony of Jamestown is founded. 1608, La Ville du Gupta Fund. 1639, Sikoku begins in Japan. 1644, end of Ming Dynasty, rise of the Qing. 1647, the Hartford witch trials begin. 1648, the Peace of Westphalia Treaty of Munster. 1677, Spinoza publishes the Ethics. 1692, the Salem witch trials. 1602, Dutch East India Company and the Amsterdam Stock Exchange are formed. The Dutch East India Company, or the VOC, was first established. This would mark the increase in trade between Europe and Asia and provide a state monopoly over the Orient. The Amsterdam Stock Exchange, the world's oldest, was also established around this time. 1603, Tokugawa Ieyasu becomes ruler of Japan. After unification under Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Ieyasu would take over after his death in 1598, thus ruling Japan under the Tokugawa shogunate. 1607, the colony of Jamestown is founded. This settlement would be the city of God in the New World, though would struggle with starvation, political instability, and wars with Spanish and indigenous peoples. 1608. LAVILLEVU Quebec, FONDEQ. The city of Quebec is founded by Samuel de Champlain, following the explorations of Jacques Cartier in 1534-35. 1639. SAKOKU begins in Japan. Sikokur closes their country to foreign influence or trade, except for some Dutch, Korean, and Chinese influence, as a result of Spain and Portugal's colonial and religious influence. 1644, circa end of Ming Dynasty, rise of the Qing. The heavy drought and serious locusts were the main natural causes of the collapse of Ming Dynasty, while internal rebellions under the conditions of financial crises were the major human factors resulting in the collapse of the Ming Dynasty. This would also lead to greater rise of the Manchus after their unification by Nurhaci. 1644, the Third Anglo-Powhatan War begins. This war, led by Opequan Kanoa, would mark the end of Anglo-Powhatan conflict and the destruction of the Powhatans after the death of Opequan Kanoa. 1647, the Hartford witch trials begin. The Hartford witch trials, or the Connecticut witch trials, a precursor to Salem, would result in the death of 11 executed as a result of witchcraft accusations. 1648, the Peace of WESTPHALIA Treaty of Munster. This would establish the values of state sovereignty, diplomacy, and the context of modern-day international relations. Spain would also recognize the independence of the Northern Dutch Republic. 1677, Spinoza publishes the Ethics. Spinoza publishes his magnum opus, contesting traditional religious authority, and identifies God and nature as one, a milestone in secularization, as it would emphasize a rational ordering of society and politics after the knowable, natural world. 1692, the Salem witch trials. In the town of Salem, Massachusetts, 200 plus people were accused of witchcraft, leading to 30 convictions and 19 executions. Many of the evidences were spectral, and most of the accused were women, 78%. 17th century, 1701, the Great Peace of Montreal. 1707, circa. Mughal Empire begins to decline under our ranks. 1712, first steam engine is created. 1734, the Great Fire of Montreal. 1736, circa. SAFAVID Empire ends. 1756, the 7 Years' War begins. 1757, the Battle of Plassey. 1763, the Royal Proclamation of Britain. 1764, Spinning Jenny is made. 1764, the Treaty of Niagara. 1772, the Somerset v. Stewart case. 1776, America declares independence. 1776, The Wealth of Nations is published. 1783, the Crimean Khanate is annexed. 1789, French Revolution begins. 1791, the Haitian Revolution begins. 1798, Napoleon seizes control of Malta, Syria, and Egypt. 1701, the Great Peace of Montreal. On the 4th of August, 1701, the French concluded a peace agreement with the Five Nations Haudenosaunee Iroquois. This brought to an end almost a century of hostilities marked by atrocities on both sides. However, it gave the French the freedom to expand militarily over the next half-century and assured new French superiority when dealing with First Nations. 1707, circa. Mughal Empire begins to decline under our ranks, a result of a mixture of succession wars, geographic overextension, a depleted imperial treasury, and losses to rival powers in South Asia. 1712, first steam engine is created by Thomas Newcomen. This would be later improved by James Watt in 1769. 1734, the Great Fire of Montreal. It is assumed that Marie Joseph Angelique set fire in revenge of her owner, Madame Francoville, though her being guilty or innocent remains contentious. She would have her trial and execution soon after this. 1736, circa. Safavid Empire ends during the reign of Shah Suleiman, who ruled from 1667 to 1694. Famine and disease spread throughout the country. His successor, Shah Sultan Hossein R. 1694 to 1722 was the main cause of the end of the Safavid Empire. 1756, the 7 Years' War begins. This war was fought by most of the great European powers and spanned 5 continents, affecting Europe, the Americas, West Africa, India, and the Philippines. For Britain, this war was mainly aimed to destroy France as Britain's commercial rival, focusing on wars overseas. 1757, the Battle of Plassey, caused by abuse of British East India Company's privileges and lack of tax payment. The BEIC, British East India Company, took greater control of the Indian subcontinent, beginning the extremely profitable period of company rule. This would mark the beginning of increased British influence through BEIC in India. 1763, the Royal Proclamation of Britain. England defeats France and establishes crown sovereignty over territory that First Nations occupied. This would contribute to America's manifest destiny, as they would not be able to expand west as a result of the Indian Reserve. 1764, spinning jenny is made. James Hargreaves' spinning jenny would revolutionize the process of cotton spinning. The machine used 8 spindles onto which the thread was spun, so by turning a single wheel, the operator could now spin 8 threads at once. This would show the increase of industry that would precede the Industrial Revolution. 1764, the Treaty of Niagara. 24 nations accepted the Treaty of Niagara on the condition of British concessions and return of prisoners, non-interference in Indigenous affairs, and mutual respect. This was reported in Wampum Belt. 1772, the Somerset v. Stewart case established that escaped slaves in England could not be forcibly returned to slave owners in Britain's overseas colonies. When slaves got to Britain, they were freed. 1776, America declares independence. The Declaration of Independence, or the severance of the 13 colonies from Britain, is adopted by the Congress on July 4th. The Treaty of Paris, ratified September 3rd, 1783, indicates Britain's acceptance of American independence, ending the war. 1776, The Wealth of Nations is published. Adam Smith would change the ideas of modern economics and form the basis of classic economics. 1783, the Crimean Khanate is annexed. This would begin 134 years of rule by the Russian Empire, encompassing most of Ukraine. 1789, French Revolution begins. The Bastille falls. The Declaration of Rights of Man and the Citizen is written. This paper represents the values of the French Revolution and has a significant impact on the development of popular conceptions of individual liberty and democracy in Europe and worldwide. 1791, the Haitian Revolution begins on the 21st of August 1791, when the slaves of Saint-Domingue rose in revolt. The slaves began to kill their masters and plunged the colony in a civil war. Commissioner Felicity Saint-Belnax declares slavery abolished in 1793. 1798, Napoleon seizes control of Malta, Syria, and Egypt. After installing the French system of rule, this event marks the beginning of Orientalist archaeology. Many scholars who were trained in many areas of archaeology came along and trained in figuring out Egypt. 18th century, 1804, Haiti declares independence. 1804, Napoleon crowns himself emperor. 1807, the slave trade is made illegal in England. 1815, the Battle of Waterloo. 1825, Tsar Nicholas I comes to power. 1830, Charles X takes over the Dylik of Algiers. 1839, the First Opium War. 1804, Haiti declares independence. Jean-Jacques Dessalines declares San Domingo, Haiti independent on January 1st, 1804, after expelling the French in Napoleon's attempt to reclaim Haiti and reinstate slavery. 1804, Napoleon crowns himself Emperor. Bonaparte would overthrow the Directory in France and substituted the consulate in 1799. It also ends the French Revolution. This would show the beginning of the First French Empire when Napoleon declares himself emperor and later instates the highly important Napoleonic Code. 1807, the slave trade is made illegal in England. The slave trade was made illegal, though slavery would not end until 1838. This would mark the slow process of abolition across the world. 1815, the Battle of Waterloo. 1848, the Communist Manifesto is published. 1849, Harriet Tubman escapes. 1853, Commodore Perry's Black ships open Japan. 1857, the Sepoy Rebellion. 1867, Canada begins. 1868, enter Meiji Restoration. 1870-71, Italy and Germany unify. 1876, the Ems Decree bans the Ukrainian language. 1884, the Berlin Conference. 1894, First Sino-Japanese War. 1899, Boxer Rebellion. British and Allied troops led by the Duke of Wellington defeats Napoleon's troops at Waterloo, leading to his abdication, the end of the Napoleonic Wars and the ascent of Britain as Western Europe's greatest power. 1825, Tsar Nicholas I comes to power. This reign would strengthen the Pale of Settlement. The Pale gradually shrank and became more restrictive for the Jews. 1830, Charles X takes over the Dylik of Algiers after remaining unpopular, and in order to stop Barbary privateering, Charles X would conquer Ottoman Algeria. This would begin a long line of France's scorched earth policies against the Algerian population. 1839, the First Opium War, mainly in favor of a better trade relation with Qing China, and for Qing China to settle their financial situation, China and Britain went to war. This would result in the Treaty of Nanjing, 1842, and serve as a starting point to the unequal treaties of China's century of humiliation. 1848, the Communist Manifesto is published in London. This book was written by Karl Marx and Frederick Engels and would hold the founding principles of the modern communist movement in reaction to capitalism and mass industrialization. 1849, Harriet Tubman escapes. This would be her first escape from Maryland and be the start of her various escapes through the Underground Railroad. 1853, Commodore Perry's Black ships open Japan. After a letter from the U.S. president at the time, America required the shogun to open up the country to trade and diplomacy. Gunboat diplomacy. This would be the end of Shikoku, the fall of the Tokugawa shogunate, Offuku, and the precursor to the Meiji Restoration. 1857, the Sepoy Rebellion. After a mutiny of sepoys, an Indian soldier serving under Britain in the BEIC's company in the state of Uttar Pradesh, it would begin an uprising of sepoys and Indian civilians alike against the British. This would make Britain rule India under the Crown and the British Raj instead of the BEIC. 1867, Canada begins. The British North America Act, or Constitution Act 1867, united the three territories of Canada, Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, into Canada. It made the federal government responsible for the First Nations. 1868, enter Meiji Restoration. After the Tokugawa shogun, who ruled Japan in the feudal period, the emperor, who named himself Meiji, would be restored to power. Here, Japan would slowly modernize, like creating the constitution, militarizing, and fueling their intentions for empire. 1870-71, Italy and Germany unify. Italy unifies. 1870, under Giuseppe Garibaldi, and Germany unifies. 1871, under Otto von Bismarck, indicating the slow start of modern nationalism. 1876, the Ems Decree bans the Ukrainian language. A silent decree is said to ban the use of Ukrainian language except for old documents, like Ukrainian publications or the staging of plays and lectures in Ukrainian. This indicates the Russification movement of Ukraine by the Russian Empire. 1884, The Berlin Conference. This conference, often known as the Scramble for Africa, would determine how European powers would influence the continent. This would also establish the barbaric Congo Free State under Leopold II of Belgium. 1894, First Sino-Japanese War. As Japan looks to expand overseas, they have a dispute with the Qing over Joseon, Korea. This would end China's hegemony in East Asia, as well as the tributary system. 1899, Boxer Rebellion. The Boxer Rebellion, or the Yunchuan Movement, was an anti-foreign, anti-colonial, and anti-Christian uprising in China towards the end of the Qing dynasty by the Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists, Yunbun. 19th century, 1909, Gandhi writes the Swaraj. 1914, World War I, September 1st, 1939, September 2nd, 1945, World War II, 1909, Gandhi writes the Hind Swaraj. This text would inspire the Indian nationalist movement, though through unconventional means of revolution, to embrace what was Indian and reject the violence of English civilization. 1914, World War I. This war, being the first world war after intense militarization and scientific advancement, would be one of the big turning points against the act of modernizing. September 1st, 1939, September 2nd, 1945, World War II. World War II, or the Second World War, often abbreviated as WWII or WW2, was a global conflict that lasted from 1939 to 1945. The vast majority of the world's countries, including all of the great powers, fought as part of two opposing military alliances, the Allies and the Axis.